Hey, it's Sean Kidney. I'm the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative. As a few of you might know, we're a global NGO devoted to mobilising global capital for climate action. I want to talk to you today a little bit about the scene, the setting, the background to why we're doing this, what we're doing, and a little bit of what we're looking to do. As you know, it started. The big change that our scientists have been talking about for 30 years, that we've been pontificating, worrying about, has started. Climate has begun to turn. This year we've seen fires, floods, droughts, snow in Brazil, weird weather, vast forest fires across Siberia as the permafrost melts, releasing huge amounts of carbon to the atmosphere, and so on. There's no doubt now that the change is underway. Palpably it is. Of course, the pandemic is part of those changes. As those of you who've been following Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reading so many years would know, the IPCC Health Committee has been predicting pandemics for some 30 years as something that will rise out of climate change. Sure enough, we've had a few attempts now. We've got one that got away as a result of collapsed biodiversity, pathogens jump between species, etc. We will have more. We are lucky. This one only had a 1% mortality rate. Tell that to the loved ones who died. SARS, if it had got through, had a 20% mortality rate for 30 to 40-year-olds. That would have left a very different shredded world economy and society in its wake. We have to prepare. We have to prepare in two ways. First, we're in a race to avoid catastrophic climate change. Understand that the climate change we are experiencing now will get worse for 30 years. The latency effect in the atmosphere means that the emissions we put in 30 years ago are what is really contributing to the current climate change. If we were to stop emissions cold tomorrow, we would still have climate change for the next 30 years getting worse before it would hopefully, it's a bit uncertain, get better. So we need to do both things, mitigate and prepare for resilience. On the mitigation agenda, we've got a pretty short period. The IPCC says to have a reasonable chance, and it is only a chance. In finance, we're risk people. We calibrate. And when we're told that a chance, we're talking about 1% or 40%, well, they're not great odds at the moment, but it is a chance that we can avoid catastrophic climate change, which is where we get into the 6 to 8 degrees average warming on the planet, 10 degrees over land masses. It is uncertain that human life can be sustained with catastrophic climate change. Humans, as far as we know, have never existed on this planet with temperatures as high as are being projected under catastrophic climate change, let alone greenhouse gas in the atmosphere and so on. So we've got 10 years to get emissions, or 8 years really, to 2030, to get emissions down 55% globally. On average, that means for every small country that doesn't, a large country needs to do more. We've had a bit of a win. The major economies of the world have committed to varying degrees of roughly 50% cuts. Of course, they've still got to figure out how to do it. They're arguing, yes, we're going to cut 50%, but we still need a few more fossil fuel power stations, etc., etc. Get involved, please. These things are a matter of life and death for our children. We've had some experience with life and death. In the 1600s, we had climate change. Great book by Geoffrey Parker at Cambridge University called The Global Climate Crisis. He describes what happened. And we now know from Stanford University that climate crisis was actually human-induced. We killed so many American Indians in the 1500s through smallpox and measles that we lost something like 90% to more, or maybe even 95%. We're not sure of the population of the Americas to the disease. Whole civilizations in the forests disappeared. The forest regrowth we now know from tree rings was extraordinary. It sucked carbon out of the atmosphere. Kind of hopeful in a way if we grow forests. But we extinguished populations and reduced temperatures. 2 degrees cooling we saw in the 1600s. That was a century of war, famine and plague. We lost a third of the world's population, a third, in 100 years, from plague, famine, war and various other kinds of calamities. Crops didn't grow for 2 years because of winters that wouldn't go away. All sorts of things happen, including some feedback loops. It's a good story, but it's a chilling story. We're talking about, at minimum, 2 degrees warming. We aim for 1.5. We hope to hell we can get it back down to 1.5. It will go up and it might come down. That's why we're pushing for 1.5. We have to prepare now. It's not just getting emissions down. It's not just clean energy. It's not just low carbon, zero carbon transport. It's not just changing our land use practice to regrow forests to suck some of that carbon out of the atmosphere, but also to renovate, reform what we're doing to our soils so they sequester carbon, not release carbon, and so on and so on. There are so many aspects to this agenda. It's also preparing for the tough stuff. We will see many more climatic incidents. One thing you can be sure of is when people are hit by terrible calamity, typhoons in East Asia that will be 3 times as intense as they currently are. We expect floods, droughts. We don't know how it's going to be. We're just taking wild guesses, somewhere between 1 metre and maybe even as high as 5 metre sea level rise during the course of this century. We just don't know because we haven't seen this before. Our scientists are doing reasonable estimates. They tell us we have to prepare. That's the physical impacts. That is, yes, coastal protection. Like the Netherlands, the country with the money to do it, has been doing, and funding it, by the way, with their sovereign certified climate bond. We need to be looking at the social aspects of this. As we've learned from the pandemic, it's not just about the physical aspects, it's also about people being able to survive, to earn an income, to get access to healthcare. And you know what? If they don't, they will keep working. And the disease, as we've seen in the US, in Brazil, in so many places, continues to spread. People need to be able to feed their children. And in a crisis, that's going to require some level of support. And it's not just going to be able to be support in the rich countries. Pandemics have a way of spreading through borders. We need to be thinking globally. Millions of people on the move from climate disasters have a way of spreading through borders. We need to prepare to support them in those countries. We need to think about how we manage a planet in times of increased volatility, of regular climatic shock. It means figuring out how to better work together, investing in our international institutions. The World Health Organization needs triple the budget, not arguments about cutting the budget. But the UN High Commissioner of Refugees also needs triple the budget because there will be more refugees. We already now have more refugees in camps around the world than ever before in human history. It will get worse. We need to negotiate free passage. We need to actually be able to shift them when they have to be shifted. In the delta of Bangladesh, many people may not be able to stay. Where will they go? It's not just the Rohingya, it's also the Bangladeshis. India has built razor wire on the border at the moment. We've got to be able to manage that. If we don't, we will see implosions. We will see Syrias and Somalias on steroids. we will see, like the 1600s, war, famine, droughts as part of it, plagues. It's a test. Can we work together? Or will we atomise again into fragmented societies that might extinguish the nature of civilization as we know it, as happened at the end of the Roman Empire, for example, where we saw climate change and plagues? Whoa, it's a big agenda. But it's a defining agenda. This is what we're here to do. To learn, to understand, to become the conscious stewards of the planet, not the unconscious, juvenile, destructive stewards of the planet that we are right now. We've had some wins. You know, over the last few years, we've seen dramatic changes in things like energy. Solar is becoming cheap, and will continue to become cheaper. Thanks, to be honest, to the work of the German government in 2001, thank you Green Party, who delivered a feed-in tariff which started driving down the price of solar. And then the Chinese picked this up a few years later. Massive procurement of solar drove down the price, and now the world is reaping the benefits. Strong state action will reap dividends for the whole planet. We've seen the growth of green finance. I mean, that's why we're here today, isn't it? We have a market this year will be approaching, in green and sustainable bonds, $2 trillion outstanding. That's not billion, that's not million, that is trillion. An unimaginable number a few years ago. Of course, it's not enough. We need to see about 50 trillion before we're making a substantive impact on the planet. Well, it'll be more by the time we finish. In terms of shifts of capital to climate solutions, we need to see about 6 trillion a year. Half to mitigation, half to resilience. The resilience proportion is tiny at the moment. Of course, it's not all just new capital. On the contrary, a large part of it is shifting the current allocations of capital to more sustainable outcomes. Less freeways, more mass transit. If we're building water infrastructure, are we building it for 2050 and 2060, or are we building it for the 20th century? There's a lot of shift in capital, in the allocation, the understanding, the planning of capital that will be represented in that 6 trillion a year. But it will be 6 trillion a year. We're probably at about 1 trillion a year now. We hope to see green bonds getting to 1 trillion a year. Well, it'll be 2023, but I'm pushing for next year. Help me get there. That gives us hope. As the seas rise, the green bond market is rising faster and faster and faster. That's good news. Of course, we know we have the capital to do all of this. In the world we're going into, public sector balance sheets will be constrained by the fact they're going to have to deal with emergencies again and again. Hurricane Ida's in the US will become normal in every country around the world. That means that wherever we can tap private capital, and we have more than enough private capital in pension funds and insurance funds around the world, we need to, so that we can save the budget to deal with the crisis that happens year in and year out, a bit like the pandemic happening every few years. So as we do that, we can mobilise that capital. And you know what? That capital wants to be mobilised, 100 trillion or so, in institutional investment hands around the world, has said that it's worried about its long-term sustainability and the sustainability of the economy and the society. We see coalitions popping up, Climate Action 100, Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, and more and more and more. Great, fantastic. We've proven with that green and sustainable bonds market, if we design investments for that sector, they will invest. This market is growing 80% this year. And it's not a tiny market anymore, it's a large market. And it will keep growing. So we have proof of concept. We know the capital's there. We know the solutions are there. When you start digging around, you will find in every sector there are mature solutions ready to go. Of course, they need financial structuring to make sure they're viable and pay a return to the pension funds that will invest. Of course, they need deal flow and they need capital. But they are there. And at a time when large slabs of the world's capital is invested in zero or negative interest rate German bonds or Japanese bonds, how lucky are we? We have this vast, somewhere between $90 and $100 trillion of investment to make in shifting to a clean, green society, a resilient society, and we have the capital sitting over here in the wrong place, not earning enough money. It's just got to shift. That is the role of the finance sector. That is our role. That's our mission, to contribute to this solution, to make sure the capital flows to the right place. Sustainable returns for sustainability of the planet. It's not a hard ask, is it? And we've shown we can do it. The investments will be everywhere. In cities, we need efficient buildings. Hey, we've got some crazy things happening. In the last 10 years, we built nearly as much air conditioning capacity in the world as with renewable energy capacity. This is lunatic. All that energy being used by air conditioners stuck on the side of buildings around the world. We can shift this by designing and rolling out and promoting super efficient air conditioning and district air conditioning and various things to get down the energy, and buildings that have better insulation. In hot countries, we may have to go underground. In the Gulf, we're going to see temperatures of weeks of 60 degrees Celsius by the time we get to the mid-century. How do we prepare our built environment for that? Well, thermal properties of ground could be really good. We know in industry we have to transition industry from high carbon to low carbon, steel, cement, manufacturing, chemicals, all of these things now. Not in 2040, not in 2030, it's got to start now. Everything has to start now. But the opportunities, well, join our hydrogen session on Friday, I should say, and find out about the kinds of opportunities that are presenting themselves. In green hydrogen, this is a sector that is going to go nuts in the next few years. We expect to see high volume, low cost green hydrogen being ubiquitous by 2030. And at that point, you're going to say, why would I want gas if it's fossil fuels? Look, I can't confirm, nothing's certain, but the futures are now presenting themselves and they need to be delivered with capital investment and sensible management and, of course, the financial services. The banking sector, committed to green, can achieve. In resilience, there will be property investments, there will be city investments, there will be agricultural investments. It's a lot to be done. More than enough to keep the species occupied for a few years, to keep humans fully occupied for a few years. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because we know what to do. And I'm hopeful because the capital is there and it wants to go green. The problems look vast. The opportunity is equally vast. If we invest all of this, well, this will be the largest investment boom in the history of humanity. It'll make China in the 1990s and 2000s look like small beer. And that will create jobs. And that will create the opportunity for a better life for all our citizens around the world. That's how we'll do it. On the back of energy, but we've got to do a few things. We do need to get better at collaboration. I said, building up UN organisations, thinking about new ways the world can work together. Your mission, our mission. If you're an investor, please do more. You're already working on this to shift your portfolios to green. But remember that shifting your portfolios could end up being shifting the deck chairs in the Titanic. We do need to get the Titanic, the global economy, to shift course. So look for ways to work with your other colleagues and other organisations like climate bonds. This will be a big part of our work next year to shift the whole ship, to change the economy so all investments can become sustainable. Support governments and corporations that have the requisite ambition, and really be careful about the requisite ambition. Lack of ambition will kill us. Adequate ambition will save us. Support them, invest in them, even if they're starting way over here, like some of the world's highest carbon emitting companies who are now beginning to grapple with the change. Support them through that change. Banks, we need deals, folks. We need a lot of them. We need your clients to understand the opportunity, the necessity, what a transition looks like. We've got a few banks. Some of the interviews from our sponsors during the course of this conference are like amazing. When we have Chuko Muna from JP Morgan talking about what they're looking at doing, fills me with hope. Val Smith from Citi fills me with hope. Credit Suisse, Marissa Drew, BNP Paribas Asset Manager, Mizuho, these banks are wrestling, are grappling, are committing to the change. Hey, let's watch them and make sure we continue to push them. But it fills me with hope. Development banks around the world are changing. They're not all where the European Investment Bank is yet. A climate bank, stopping all investments in fossil fuels. They should be, every single one. This year, let's see, we've got the CFO of the New Development Bank, Leslie Masdorp, speaking on Thursday. We've got many, many development banks where the board members are changing, like the US pushing to be green. Let's not leave it 2 or 3 years, please. Let's do it now. Green our portfolios, and remembering that greening is combined with development. It is not against development. If we develop in sustainable ways in Africa, in Latin America, and South Asia, we provide a future where there isn't a future at the moment. And governments enabling policies to change. You don't have to pay for all of this through government taxes. You can pay for it by organising the enabling environment so capital will flow. Capital from pension funds and insurance funds that want to flow. That's our challenge, that's our opportunity. Look, it is an amazing opportunity. We do have green bonds and green finance out of the gates. They're away. It's a tool. We can make them do more to energise markets, to energise investors, to energise governments. That's what we've been doing. That's the purpose of it. We've proven that green investments are lower risk. We get tighter pricing for green bonds now in liquid currencies. That is about investors recognising that the universe of investments that are green are less at risk of change than other investments going forward, and that is absolutely right. We'll hear Rathin Roy tomorrow on Thursday talk about the lower volatility aspects of green bonds and the green transformation, proving to be a better investment bet than the old ones. $2 trillion so far in this market. 50 trillion to come. There's a way to go. It's a good start, but there's a way to go. We need to make the money flow. It's our opportunity to make a real difference. It's our necessity. I mean, if we don't, we're kind of stuffed, really. But if we do create a future that our children can be proud to live in. That's why I'm doing it. That's why you were doing it. Find out more in the next couple of days about how we do it. Good luck. See you next year.